We are doing these weekly webinars on various facets for development. Last week, we had Professor Deepa Sinha talking about gender in development. So this week with us is Dr. Charan Pradhan. He was my ex-colleague and a very distinguished person who has worked with data for last 15 years, 15 to 16 years with Center for Policy Research, where I was also working. And uh, wrote seminal papers on urbanization, especially on rural urban transition, census town, small town growth, rural non-farm participation in India, migration, and labor force participation in India. So Kanhu works with National Institute of Urban Affairs, Center for the Sustainable Urban Livelihood. It's a new center at NIUA House, which works as a think tank of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs on urban poverty alleviation and urban livelihood generation. So he is also working with a lot of new data that government dealing with, which I hope some snippets we can see today, as well as a lot of work that has been done. I personally know in my capacity that Kanhu is doing in terms of working with government data sets like census and NSS, which are pillar of India's welfare program for the last since independence, and then the new age data sets like MIS and direct benefit transfer, administrative data sets within the government, and social media data sets that are coming. So the objective of the talk, he will be providing us to a brief overview of how the data landscape in the public policy system in India has been developed over time. And Kanhu is the best person, probably I know, who can give us a 360-degree overview of that, because there are very few people in India who has worked with all of these forms of data together and triangulated them through their work over time. So Dr. Pradhan is also, other than that, he worked with Center for Policy Research before, and he is also a PhD from Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. Over to Dr. Pradhan for your talk. We will have 40 to 45 minutes of this talk, and then we can keep 15 minutes about talking about our program in general that we do and some sort of discussion based on the data. Yes, Professor Pradhan, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Samindra. Thank you, Dr. Samindra, for the generous introduction, and thank you very much. Thank you very much for the department for the invitation. So just give me a second so I can upload my. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see that. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. As you said, Samindra, so it's a Saturday also. Some part of the country, it's a holy. So double holidays. But yeah, thank you very much for joining. Actually, I attended the last week talk by Dr. Sinha. So it was very interesting because recently I'm working something related to care work, women's domestic work. So it was interesting for me to learn a lot of things from that presentation. But what I realize, my presentation is really, it might be slightly different from that presentation because it is not going to focus like one particular topic. It will cover like examples from different types of data and what I have learned over the years working with different data sets. As we all know, this topic is about like data and development. So this is a like field, it has changed a lot, at least in last 20-30 years because of technological digital development. I think that is the like biggest reason for those changes. Now we have like more data available, new data available. So there is a like vast number of data available to us as a researcher or a like practitioner in development studies. So it creates a like a lot of opportunity for us to actually look at areas which were previously unthinkable of. But at the same time, also all this data uh, has their own challenges or creates separate challenges for a researcher. As a researcher user, we have to always keep updating ourselves with those skills, tools, techniques. So it's like opportunity as well as a challenges for a researcher. So my objective is to actually how like I started as a researcher primarily with our old data and SSO sensors. Then we moved into say different types of administrative data. Then now we have different types of digital data. So this is my personal experience. Uh, for some you may agree or not agree, we can discuss, but this is like purely a like personal experience as a data user. Uh, okay. We're talking about like two concepts here. One is data and development. I think development, we know it's like very much like much bigger concept, broader concept. When we are talking about development, we are talking about something that can improve our quality of life or standard of life. For development, income or GDP or any kind of economic measure, that is something necessary, but it may not be it may not be sufficient. There are like other various other aspects that is crucial for when you are talking about development, whether it is health, education, or even like different types of freedom, climate, political. So it's a like much bigger term. On the other hand, data is a like simple, it's a piece of fact. We can, it can be like number, a reward, or any kind of useful information. So in data, we always like categorize it into like quantitative data and qualitative data. Quantitative, basically we can measure it. Qualitative is we cannot measure it, but it has some like description. So this is the like standard quantitative qualitative distinction. Then also we can distinguish the data into structured data and unstructured data. Structured data, basically there is a like clear structure. A like common example would be like our Excel sheet or CSV file. It has like row, column, so it's much easier to use. On the other hand, we have unstructured data, which is like a lot of text or image, video. Yeah, then in between is like semi-structured data, which has like little bit of structure, but it's not like a properly organized data set. So how these two terms like data and development, they are interlinked. So as an economy, like it's our resources is always limited. Our government or policymakers, they always try to uh, consider multiple options, then prioritize something over others. So for those kind of actually targeted interventions, uh, it is important to identify what are the needs or gaps in a society, and for identifying these gaps, I think data is crucial to give us uh, number based or like fact based evidence, and then we can use those data to make informed decision making. Also, data can be used to monitor progress our society on different aspects. So in these presentations, I am basically dividing all data into three broad type. Uh, uh, these are not the exhaustive list, but I'm just making it for the sake of simplicity. So I am first type is traditional data. So these are data something like census and survey data. These data are like very old. I'll talk about later. So these are like old data. Most of this data usually they are government data, but nowadays we have also non-government or research think tank data. Uh, they are collecting or conducting surveys. The aim of this data is direct to support policy making or monitoring progress of a society. Most of these data are like structured, so it is easy to use, and nowadays they are like freely available. Administrative data, this is not new. this is actually, you could say this is much older than even our traditional data, because any kind of policy interventions, it creates a data. And in most cases, it is generated by government officials. But in recent years, the availability of this data are becoming much more easier than before. If you look at the structure of the data, they are mixed. Some data you could find structures, others are like completely unstructured, uh, and their access can be mostly they are free, but but they could be restricted. So it's very someone like we have to get approvals, or they are like a firewall. A lot of restrictions are applied to get access to this data. And third data is much more like recent data, we could say 20 years kind of data, which are data uh, generated as a result of boom of the digital area. Most of these data are private data. Some of them can be like government data. Uh, so like a common example of like user generated digital data is like our Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube data. And in most cases, uh, they are unstructured, and their access mostly restricted. There are various like APIs, privacy issues in accessing those data. And in user generated data, how those generated, basically that reason can be complex in some cases. Like YouTube, some part of this data is financially motive, others is like Facebook, users are like trying to give their own expression or something. So in this presentation, I'll just cover these three kinds of data. I'll try to uh, give at least one example of one each of these data, and share my experience, how I have used and what I have learned and not learned from those exercises. Also, I should just clarify at this point in this presentation, I might be focusing more on quantitative data, but that doesn't mean that quantitative data or qualitative data, they are like one is better than others. Actually, quantitative, qualitative data, they complement each other and equally important for any kind of research. Simply, I'm focusing on quantitative because my more familiarity with the quantitative data, even though I have worked with some qualitative data. Another thing is uh, we are not covering GIS data is in this lecture, because I think the complexity of GIS data is it's much more complex. I think a separate session or separate discussion around GIS data would be useful. Also, Dr. Samindra, I think he is an expert in GIS data. He would be a better person to uh, talk about GIS data than me. So with these like limitations, I will skip to move to traditional data. Okay, so as Samindra also mentioned, uh, our statistical system, traditional data collection methodology, it is one of the oldest in the world, and it is also most credible, respected in the world as a like credible data source. If you look at the table on the right hand side, we are collecting population census data for almost like 150 years, even much before than the our independence. NSS data is also like 78 years old. Then there are other PLFS data, economic census data. These are also very old data. PLFS is a slightly newer data, but it's very much linked to NSS data. But we can say that these data are like very old, and they are well respected around the world. So when we talk about this kind of census or survey data, they have both merits and limitations. Firstly, as I said, they are reliable because you have a already established system in place where the data goes through like several steps before it can be accessible to users like us. And in most cases, survey data are representative because there is like robust sampling design. And These data, most of these data, at least not all of them, but these data are like repeated over time. So there is a scope for comparability and across time also within regions. They cover mostly all over India, most of these data, and they are free. And these data are like standardized and highly structured data. There are challenges, like if you look at census data. So this data is collected once in 10 years. This is same for many of these NSS data. So the gap between different round is very long. If you look at the consumption expenditure data, the last was in 2021, then the recent was in 2022. So it almost took like 10 years to actually get a consumption expenditure data. Then there is a delay in data release. At least we can, there is a lot of progress in this aspect, but at least we can say this per census data. We could see there like some data which we get after like 3, 4, even 5 years after the census being conducted. Then the third problem, major problem is data accessibility or data release is it's very much limited. If you look at census data, actually there are many useful data. Some are related to migration, they are not being released. And there is no particular reason why they are not being released, but they are not released. So it's like a bad thing, because we are spending so much of money for collecting those data, but we are not using them for any kind of policy making or development discourse. So that is the unfortunate part of some of our old traditional data system. So what I'll do, I'll just give you one example how we use this traditional data for policy making. So this is something actually I borrowed from last lecture from Dr. Sinha's lecture, and I add something to just make us think how this data can be useful for policy purpose or as a user, as a researcher. So if you remember Dr. Sinha's last lecture, she was talking about labor force participation rate, and particularly female or women's labor force participation rate. So as we all know, in the labor force participation rate for women is in India is one of the lowest in the world, very much comparable to many of these I think Gulf countries. If you look at rural urban labor force participation rate for women, it is much more lower in urban areas than rural areas. So in literature, we have different aspects which are being contributed or at least explain those kind of low participation rate. And we all know like social cultural norm is like the most talked reason for those low level force participation rate. Also, we know about U-shaped curve. Then we also know about like unsafe working condition for women. But I'll just talk about the last point. In India, if you look at women's time, uh, in a day, actually they spend a lot of time on household responsibility. So household responsibility, it can be two types broadly. One is your domestic duties like cleaning, cooking, all those kind of things. Then other is like uh, care service, whether child care or any kind of elderly care. So if you look at the time use survey data for say to 2019, because we don't have the recent data for 24, and if you look at that data in urban area, working age women in the age of 15 to 59, they spend around 7 hours a day on these kind of unpaid activities. In most cases, these are unpaid activities. uh, And if you look at the same activity, the time spent by men in similar activity, the women's activity in this women's time in these activities are almost like 4 times higher than men. And actually, in many countries, women actually spend a lot of time in this activity, but the gap between men and women in India is much more higher than many countries, including even our neighboring country like Sri Lanka. So this is something I think already talked about a lot in the literature, but what I want to share with you something. I was like looking at the data and I found something useful. I thought it would be useful to share with you. So if you're familiar with NSS data, particularly the PLFS or any kind of employment data, so the standard way to calculate labor force participation rate is usual principal or usual subsidiary status or the usual status. They are slightly different from each other, but result wise you don't find much difference between these three. So what these activities is basically say, these are like based on major time criteria in last 3 years. So they will ask in which activity a person spend most time in last 1 year. So that is the way we define our uh, principal status and we calculate the labor force participation rate. And that is how we calculate women's labor force participation rate, whether they are part of the labor force or not. So if you look at the time use survey data, so it has two levels of information. So it has information on labor force participation rate. So we know how many women are employed, unemployed, and not in labor force. This same data, because it's a time use survey data, actually it captures all different activities of a person during 24 hours. So, and they categorize whether each of these activity is paid or unpaid. So actually we can just cross-tab these two different data sets. One is labor force participation rate, another is paid and unpaid activity. So if you look at the table here, so this table is for urban areas and only for female and for working age 15 to 59. So out of all women, 100 women, I found that around 2.1%, 2% women, they are not in a labor force. So they are not counted in our usual labor force participation count, but actually they are engaged in some sort of paid activity. So I find this very interesting because firstly, whether this is a data issue, if that is the case, then also it is an important thing to understand. If it is not a data issue, then are you undercounting 2% of women in our usual estimation? I could understand these people or these women are not full-time worker or may not be necessarily full-time worker. Some of them might be working part-time, or some of them had took some sort of maternity leave or any kind of leave, just recently joined in the labor force. There could be different explanation for those things. I have not looked at these like various details about those numbers, but even these aggregate numbers, I think poses some questions about uh, 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 it could have like various implication for policy making. If these are people who are working not counted in labor force, can government do something so they can at least facilitate their work? So I think this kind of statistics or data point would be useful to contribute to our policy making discourse or any kind of discourse around these areas. Uh, Okay, this is like I just added like half an hour ago because I'm not an expert in like poverty, but I thought maybe it would be useful to just pose a question here. So you all know that for last 10 years, we didn't have a like official poverty number. In 2011-12, we had the last official headcount poverty number because we didn't have NSS data on consumer expenditure survey. So in 21 and 23, Niti Aayog published 2 reports. They use NFHS data to calculate something called multidimensional poverty index, which is different from our usual absolute poverty criteria. So they consider 12 indicators related to health, nutrition, and others, and calculated and found that there is a rapid decline in headcount poverty or number of poor in the country. So like if you look, recently there is a paper published in APW by Himanshu, Peter Lange and others. They actually use the recently released consumer expenditure data to calculate poverty rate, which is very much similar to the official way. So they also found that there is a lot of decline in poverty, and almost poverty rate in India is almost 5% today. 5% is actually, it's a like almost a very few poverty number. So I was a little like unsure, like how do you take this number? Because if you say that, okay, we have almost no poverty, then what about the big like poverty debate we had, whether we should stop with our absolute poverty, move on, think about something else, or do you think, okay, no poor in the sense there is no poverty, because poverty is like, we have like different indicator which is contrasting those things, employment, inflation, wage, different social indicators. So one hand no poverty, other hand we have some not so good indicator. So how do you like relate these two kind of numbers? So just like I thought it's useful to pose this question for us. Okay, I'll now quickly move on to administrative data because I think I'm running a little bit of time. Okay, so administrative data, basically I said these are not generated for policy making. They are they are generated for implementing or monitoring a specific project. But we have seen in research the data being used for various research purposes. So like Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana being used to understand its impact on rural areas. It is common to use electoral roll data for survey selection. If you look at economic survey report, or even recent paper by led Vivek Debra and Misra, they have used railway traffic data for internal migration. So these data have both merits and challenges. They are like real time, high coverage. Some data can be disaggregated. Most of this data is freely available, but they have challenges like availability vary by governments. Some central government data is available, other not. Also, there is a availability difference by ministry and schemes. And most of this data may not be user friendly. We'll get data in PDF, images. If not images like waveform, I will show you like how difficult it can be like collect this data. Then there can be accessibility issue. You have firewall, captcha, all those issues. Then there is privacy issue, but we don't have a clarity about those because we don't get any like proper system or mechanism to understand whether it is legal to use government data or not. Okay. So what I'll do, I worked on a like project on PDS, and if you know about something, one nation, one ration card. The idea here is to just give you one small example, just you to tell you uh, how it could be difficult actually to just create a small output. That this is my objective. So you know that the aim of the PDS is to provide subsidized food to poor people, and now it is almost like a legal rights for them, food rights. So in 2019, central government, they introduced something, PDS portability, or we call it one nation, one ration card. So the objective of portability or not is that it allows beneficiary to access food from any kind of fair price shop or ration shop across India. So it is almost like a ATM card you just carry and withdraw cash from any ATM machine. Okay, so this scheme has achieved a lot of it has a lot of achievements like almost 1.5 billion portability transactions in last 4-5 years, 3 crore portability every month. But like any scheme or any program, there are always issues. So in this case, I'm just asking a small question as an example. Okay, how this owner called the portability, it has benefited people from different social group. Okay, so basically how the portability rate varies by different social group. So for this, I just took Chhattisgarh as a case state. I considered the data for 6 months because uh, considering 1 month data could be problematic because portability or migration, it could be seasonal. So it's better to consider a long-term data. Then I calculate portability rate and the result is given in the graph. So what you saw that ST, the portability rate for Chhattisgarh, it was 6%, 6.2% versus the general, it was 38%. So you could see the large difference in the portability rate across social groups. So obviously it has various policy implications. I'm not going into that. But I'm just showing you how I use this data to do this simple analysis. So if I can show you something. So yeah, so this is, so for this I use two data. One is PDS portability data. So this is data for only one state. I'll show how you collect the data and how difficult it can be. So these are district level aggregate. You click a district, then these are sub-district, you click a sub-district, then you have fair price up, then you click, then this is the
Kanhu,
data. Yes.
are you trying to show something interactive? Because it's just showing the slide.
Okay, sorry. Just give me a second. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me. So I think this is something important. Okay,
Sure.
so this is the PDS data I was showing. So this is the case of Chhattisgarh for a particular month. So these are district level aggregates because our objective is to calculate or get data at the household level. So you want to select district, then sub district, then these are your fair price up. Then you click a fair price up. Then at the end you get household level PDS data. So this data is for one fair price shop. In Chhattisgarh, there are like 19,000 fair price shop. So if you want a 1 month data, you have to collect data for 19,000 fair price shop. If you want to collect data for 6 months, then you have to repeat this process for almost like 6 times. So another data, because this data doesn't give you social status of a household. For that we have to use another data. So they have a ration card data. So this ration card data, similarly so first thing you notice, this is like the website is a different structure. You select a district, then you select either rural or urban. Once you select something, then this is I think tehsil, then you select panchayat, then you select village, then you will get this is the ration card data, and you could see the jati column is your uh, caste data. So in Chhattisgarh, like you have around 80 lakhs data points. So just I want to give a sense like in order to make a simple graph like that, we have to actually collect a lot of data uh, before doing any kind of analysis. So what it means that like uh, our like old skill where we started working with Excel, then with Stata. Now this is not relevant. As a user, as a researcher, we have to upgrade our skill. So nowadays it is very common in all these private universities, so even government universities. So we need to learn R, Python, all these various packages. Also within that we have to understand, like familiar with various specialized packages. We have various AI tools, but still uh, it is always useful to understand what your AI or ChatGPT is giving to you. And in this exercise also, you need a lot of patience, because even if you write a code to extract those data, if I remember correctly, in order to extract the data for 6 months, I think it will take around 3 to 4 days if your computer works non-stop 24/7. So in this case, it is always useful to have collaboration. You just collaborate with people with different kind of skill sets. So this is one example I wanted to show. Uh, uh, just give me a second. Okay, so this is another example. I don't think I will have time to cover it, but I'll just uh, quickly, 30 seconds, I will just describe. So last 2 years actually, we are working with the government of Andhra Pradesh to help them in a like a bigger project to revenue generation. So I was part of a project we were working with the department of like basically department of GST and UA bill. So if you follow the newspaper, you will find there is a lot of GST fraud. And and one way this fraud happens is something called fake invoices. So they're like clever people, clever businessmen. They create like bogus farms or taxpayers. Then they will just generate fake invoices without actual transaction of goods and services. Then they will claim something called ITC, IT input tax credit, because it's so you are producing something, for that you are buying something, so you want to show that in your input tax credit. So this is a process usually followed uh, um, uh, to uh, to make this like fraud happen. So this is the government wanted to look at the data, whether we can do something to um, at least identify some suspicious transactions. So we started with one example. We said, okay, if there is a cycle, basically like A selling to B selling to C selling to A, this is a cycle. If there is a cycle is a suspicious, only if like all are suspicious spam. If like one is non-suspicious spam, you cannot have a like suspicious transaction. So we started with that assumption, and we actually uh, created a like small tools for them, where you just input a GST number, it will give you few cycles, and it will like here I have 3 cycles, and the program say, okay, you can ignore these 2 cycles because these are very old farms. They cannot like they might not be involved in fraudulent activity, but the last cycle looks suspicious. So and you can look for that in detail. So this is one example how administrative data, but it's not publicly available. Administrative data can be help in policy making. So you have other administrative data, electoral data for voting behavior, urban data. It's a scheme for understanding impact of infrastructure and rural economy. Then there is a NGO urban data, which gives like details about NGO, voluntary organizations in data, including their presence, financial positions, everything. So we have now many administrative data, but while each data creates an opportunity for further work, they also have various challenges. I show you like one example. So this is I'll just, this is my last slide. I'll take 2 minutes. So the third data is like user generated data. I was talking about Facebook, YouTube, those things. So these data, firstly, there are many data like even mobile data, Facebook data for goods. Some are like free, others are not free. In some data, there are restrictions, they have merits, demerits. The most challenging part is they are unstructured and noisy, and they are not representative, because there is always some selection bias. Then there is always privacy issues. So I'll just give you a small example. A few colleagues in our office are working. So we have a small project on Kumbh Mela, Prayagraj Kumbh Mela. So the project was about understanding pilgrims, tourist experience about the Mela. So there was a primary survey, but the team also worked with something they consider YouTube data and collected some videos, 200, 300 videos, which are specially made for Kumbh related to infrastructure or other things. Then they just gather all the comments in the in those videos. Then they classify two things. So they just calculate different frequency of different words, and based on words they create some topics. So this is something called topic modeling in statistics, even though I have never actually directly involved, but yeah. So this is something you create topics. Then for each comments you just create a sentiment, basically to identify positive, negative, or neutral. Then you combine these two. So this kind of analysis is always tricky because you would have always like scam, irrelevant comment. Also, it requires specialized techniques, even though you could use chat GPT, unless you know what is happening within the system, it would be very difficult to fine tune this. So if you look at the last graph, what they have like given three example. First is Mela management. The middle one is the overall experience. The third is related to transport. So one problem with this analysis is obviously the neutral, like neither positive nor negative, neutral kind of comments. This here is very high. So there is an issue with the model in terms of tuning. But if you forget that, still at least some part of the result is actually making sense. So what it shows, the overall pilgrim experience planning, most people they are happy with the overall experience. But if you look at the Mela management, more people are happy, but there are many people who are unhappy with those things. But if you look at the transport and mobility, actually there is something like people are more unhappy with transport mobility. Okay, so we should take this particular result with like sort of pin, because I think it requires some iteration, refinement. But their objective is to show an example how this user generated data, whether even people use Twitter X data to do similar analysis, can be used in our research. Okay, I think I'll stop here just to say that, okay, okay, the data, nature of data, it has significantly changed over the time. Now we have more administrative data, digitalization has creation of new innovative data set, GIS data set, it's like scope is increasing. So while this data creates opportunity for us, also it also requires specialized skill or skill development for us. Also it requires actually interdisciplinary collaboration. Then we can use skill from different people to fulfill a like project. Yeah, with this I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pradhan. We are very good with time, actually. And there's a lot to cover in 45 minutes. I'm sure it's not a justice to the lot of work that you've done. And probably we should get you for more specialized sort of work presentation there. So what we'll do here is we'll take a bunch of questions as much as possible, and we'll deliver it to you for answer. So I can see one question in already in the chat box, which says Bilas Day. He says that are the user generated data from social medias and others? And he writes, please give some example, if any, done by using NLP web scraping. This is one question. And then Gayatri also wants to have. Gayatri, you can unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Pradhan. That was very, very insightful. So, from a practitioner's perspective, you've been working in this area for quite long. I just wanted to understand the processes involved in getting administrative data that are not open. Like, how does that entail?
Sorry, can
Yeah.
you just repeat the question, please?
Gayatri, can you
No,
repeat the question? Yeah.
am I audible?
Yeah, you are. You are. Yeah.
Yeah. So some of the administrative data are not open data. Like you have mentioned. So I'm just saying from a practitioner's perspective, if you could just unpack the processes involved in getting these administrative data, whether like from different states or from different ministries or like other agencies, what does that entail? What is that work process getting an administrative data that's not open? Thank you so much.
And then there is a third question from Gurnaz. I'm going to read it. It says, given the number of paid PR and paid media prevalent today, how reliable is the user-generated research through public platforms for analysis? She's basically referring that a lot of this is these kinds of comments that you shared, they're paid or like noisy, intentionally made noisy. So how reliable this kind of user-generated research through public platform for analysis? Anyone else wants to ask something can unmute themselves and ask, or type in the chat box. I can read it to the presenter. Okay, I think we can go ahead with these three questions, Kanhu, if you would like to answer. You are muted. Yeah.
Sorry, the first question is about web scraping. NLP, natural language processing.
Yeah.
So actually I have not worked with like pure sophisticated modeling, but this YouTube data, it's actually some sort of like machine learning, little more than that. But I think I am familiar with the web scraping part because I showed you like one example, that PDS example. I'll just tell you a little bit about that part. Actually, I just showed you like small example. If I tell you the whole project, it took me like 1 year to actually collect the data because I am not coming from a computer science background. I had to start it from the scratch. Upgrade that skill. But at the end, actually, I learned the processes and I think I collected around 500 GB data related to only PDS and PDS and owner. So web scraping for this, I use like your Python. You have like very usual packages like Beautiful Soup, Selenium, and request packages. Uh, I think that is something one can do. It is not very, I wouldn't say difficult. Maybe like 2-3 hours lectures with some hands-on experience would be enough for at least web scraping. But the NLP, machine learning, these are, I think, more complex processes because they requires a lot of advanced skill. That is something I cannot like answer in detail. But all these packages we are using, like sentiment analysis, topic modeling, actually they are using some part of those things to understand text, the perception within those texts. And the second question is getting administrative data when it is not available. Before that, I'll just ask. It's a very difficult question for me to answer. I'll just ask a like slightly different question. Uh, when administrative data is not available, you are asking, but I'll say you when the administrative data is available with them, it is also very difficult to get access of that. I'll just give an example. Samudra might have known, like in census, there is a migration data. It's already in their computer, but they never give you. So if you are from like multilateral big university agency, it is very likely that you will get hold of those data. But if you are from a like state university from Bihar or some other state, it is better not to expect those data because for that particular I tried to follow with like RGI couple of times, but we don't find any kind of positive response. And administrative data, when it is not available, I think we can get some data from website, even though they are not structured. If there is a scheme, there will be like regular meetings. Some data, it called like CSMC, sanctioning, monitoring meetings. But, or we can use RTI to get some data, but we cannot sure what kind of data we'll get. because there could be a lot of description. They can say this is sensitive or something. So it will vary from ministry to ministry, person to person, and who you are. If you are like good, credible person, then it is very likely to that get that data. And the third question is paid PR. Yeah, I know very much. That's why I said the analysis I showed you, even I was not like completely confident about the result, because I know these are, like you said, what you have told me you can use. So as a researcher, even though it can create a challenges for us, we should not be like stop there. We could have different mechanism to improve our things, like in YouTube. So one thing, there is a user ID. You can identify the user ID or name. You can go to his Twitter or whatever account. You can identify whether that person is involved in some sort of this kind of activities or not. Obviously, it requires a lot of effort, time consuming, but at least in theory, some sort of action or remedy can be possible. But I completely agree. So it can be problematic. It can impact our result sometimes.
If anyone has any more questions, then can ask, or we can. So as you can see that this provides a lot of complexities that are around data, and development practice as a discipline is going to encounter a lot of this. We are going to introduce a lot of this in our upcoming academic programs that we are launching. It's called MSc Development Practice and MSc Development Studies. The MSc Development Studies is an online program that is going to be offered for 1 year, and MSc Development Practice and non-residential program that will be happening in the Taj facility of Jindal in Delhi. In both these courses, we're going to do different kinds of brainstorming through our curriculum about these things, because these are very relevant about the development practice. My colleague Tahiba has already put the detailed information brochure about this in the chat box. You can go and check that program about what is going to offer and what we are going to actually teaching inside that space. So what my takeaway from this whole this thing is that the landscape of database and data development has been rapidly changing. We as a researcher, for example, working in poverty, working in inequality, etc., we used to stop at NSS. Now, NSS for the last 10 years or so, the data is not different from the political spectrum, right? It's the primary tool that the politics use to shape ideas. So that's why what happens is that the collection and usage of data is also very political in nature. And you can follow any development discourse, poverty, inequality, educational discrimination, urbanization in India, you find some sort of politics that has been there. The poverty example that Professor Pradhan has given here is a very classic example that how this thing has happened. And this recent paper also told that how different methodologies in this consumption expenditure survey make it improbable to compare with the previous poverty numbers, even if you follow the same methodology. So this question becomes all the way more important, where we can venture into these alternative sources of data that has been generated every day and define new metrics and ideas about development discourses. It makes all the way more. And while doing so, there are impurities that will come through, but the learning process is also evolving. That Professor Pradhan says that through continuous upskilling, one needs to work around how to make this data set more pure and more usable, because they are going to be the future for data discourse. And in this program, we are going to talk about a lot about how these discourses are changing. That's how it will be very different from what a traditional development studies program usually offers. So thank you, Dr. Pradhan, about this. And I think it provides a very good 360-degree overview about data. And we are going to conclude here. We expect to get you more in terms of upskilling and training in our program and stars of the students or some of this and give better idea. And thanks. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you very much,
Have a great
Samir.
weekend.
Thank you very much, Samindra, and everyone, like whole of your team. Thank you very much.